Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. Money is a major theme in the Israel Keys case. In more recent years, money has proven to help solve cases. Every online transaction is recorded, and in cases like this, money helps to prove where someone has travelled to and when crimes may have occurred. Israel had many sources of income throughout his life, from selling stolen guns to contracting work and gambling. Israel sure tried a lot of money-making ventures. He was by all accounts someone who was frugal, and whether that be because he was trying to conserve his own earnings and survive off of others is uncertain. He sounds like someone who could easily manipulate a partner and live off them like a parasite, and this has been shown throughout his relationships, from an ex-partner paying for his flights, to him living with his girlfriend and being in huge amounts of debt. This is the Israel Keys video on money. I hope you enjoy. Israel commented on never having really paid taxes, as he lived under the radar for the most part. He was extremely anti-government from what it sounded like, and therefore it comes as no surprise that he didn't want the government involved in his financial situation, or worse still, taking a cut of his money. Israel started engaging in crimes as a youngster and knew how to turn valuable items into cash. He shoplifted when he was younger, and it seems like he didn't carry on with this behaviour once he reached adulthood. But home burglaries were one of the crimes that he continued perpetrating. Guns were a big part of Israel's life. He loved to shoot and sell stolen firearms. He made the comment that plenty of money could be made from the crime and went into burglaries with the main goal of finding small guns to eventually sell. Israel constantly reiterated the point that his crimes weren't done for money, yet the vast majority of his bank robbery take-ins apparently went toward paying off his debt. And of course, some went toward funding his future career so that he could continue committing crimes. It seems odd that Israel used the money to pay off debt, but when you consider what else he had to spend the money on, you realise that he was very limited and trapped by his own bad financial decisions. He had records for payments toward his construction business, along with transactions for vehicle parts in 2006, like JC Whitney Catalogue and cybersecurity site Symantec, now known as Norton LifeLock. Other transactions on Amazon and at Home Depot, where he was the first employee to be sent to pick up supplies in the Nia Bay days, were also recorded. Therefore, he could have easily purchased items unrelated to his work, relatively undetected and free of charge. As mentioned, Israel heavily relied on his partners for financial support. It stuck with me that he said that he wasn't worried about paying the bills and sometimes he'd have to scramble for money. But it makes sense when you consider that his life was funded by a partner. His lack of accountability, failure to take responsibility and excessive drinking all culminated in the breakdown of his final relationship. Travelling enabled him to escape from an area, and these trips were often funded by his partners. And this is more than just him trying to remain off the radar. I don't buy that explanation, because he was confident that he'd never be connected to his crimes. He was struggling financially, and this could have been because of excessive spending on gambling or alcohol, which are both expensive habits, or because of his own selfishness, and him not wanting to spend any money period. Israel used his partner's vehicles, and at least one of these times a crime took place. Israel would also rideshare with a friend in Washington, because both had partners living east. It's not clear just how often he did this, or if it was to save money or stay under the radar. The Samantha Koenig case helped to underline just how badly Israel needed money. For all of the talk that he didn't need money, he sure made it a priority in this case. The ransom wasn't necessary, and it was extremely risky and not worth it. Yet, Israel went ahead with the ransom and travelled thousands of miles just to recover the money. He had planned to move down to the lower 48 in 2012, and so it makes sense that he needed the money. Moving takes money, and since he had no house to sell, he needed to save up something. He had a young child who he could leave to be raised by her mum or relatives, but he wanted to be part of her life, and a transient life for a child isn't ideal. He'd be travelling for work after all. Whatever future plans Keys had would be destroyed because of the ransom plan. Money had led to his capture, and despite all of the money that he'd made, he was never truly able to escape his debt or the financial hole that he was in. There is still likely buried money in caches across the United States, but it sounded like Israel was quite desperate for the money, and so it's probably in small amounts, like the dye-stained bank robbery bills still hidden in Texas. As the FBI scoured over his financial records, they noticed transactions in the form of money orders, highly suspicious given the fact that Israel had gone off the radar when these took place. What was he trying to hide? Other criminal activity perhaps? 2 of these money order transactions for $500 and $1,000 were made on April the 13th of 2009, not long after the Tupper Lake bank robbery. Israel carefully repeated patterns over the years. By following these suspicious transactions, it helps to narrow down potential victims and dates when crimes may have occurred. However, it would appear that not all of these transactions have been made public. I wonder what the FBI are withholding about these financial transactions and what they could contain that could help benefit the case. Just how much of Israel's behaviour was being done to remain anonymous or to save on money is tough to say. Some of his behaviour appears like a combination of both, forming alibis and also conserving his money. Israel had family all over the country, and therefore this created both alibis for being in an area, but also reduced hotel bills as he could stay round theirs. Travelling is expensive, and his fuel costs would have been high, considering the distance that he drove. Israel was also seen at churches receiving free food, and why he felt the need to go to this extreme is unclear. Was he desperate for free food, and so posed as a homeless person? Or was this a more sinister display of how he operated? The answer may never be known. Israel heavily relied on credit, much like his serial killer idol H.H. Holmes, and this could have been his inspiration for living the way that he did when it came to his finances. A life of crime tends to lead to poor spending habits, and Israel had many expensive habits, like smoking, gambling, seeing prostitutes, and drinking, to name a few. Israel's secret life of crime collided with his normal life as he lived in Anchorage. He committed more crimes, and life took its toll on him. He was pretty reckless with how he operated, like when he used bank robbery take-ins to pay his mum for the plane back to Anchorage. He was impulsive and not living in reality, and his financial transactions highlight his personality and help to better understand who he truly was as a person. On his move up to Anchorage, he had to now fly everywhere in order to commit crimes far from home, and this isn't to say that he wasn't killing or committing more crimes in Alaska by this stage. He had built a thriving construction business, but his financial situation was still pretty dire. In conclusion, money is a major theme in the Israel Keys case. He always presented himself in a way that would make him seem free of flaws. I imagine that showing that you're struggling would have made him feel weak and powerless, not something you want to show in an interrogation room. Deep down, he was struggling financially, regardless of how many banks he took over or the amount of money gained from his crimes. His attitude and personality prevented him from getting ahead. His vices acted as a barrier to him growing as a person. Forever trapped as a serial killer in a fantasy world, the universe punishing him for his evil behaviour. This has been the Israel Keys video on the theme of money. As always, thank you for watching.